Some Christians say that the BBC, Britain's state broadcaster, is biased against Christianity. Is this true? The BBC certainly does have incredible influence within Britain. It shapes the conversation politically, socially, and culturally. And so its mindset is important. It has so much power. 8 national television channels, 6 regional channels, 12 local channels, and 13 international TV channels. And when it comes to radio stations, it has 11 national radio stations, 9 regional stations, and 40 local stations. It employs a staff of over 20,000 and has an income of £4.9 billion a year, and £3.69 billion of that comes from the compulsory licence fee. When it was created nearly a century ago, the man in charge of its formation was John Reith, Lord Reith as he later became. A son of the manse, John Reith shaped the BBC on Christian principles, which included equal consideration of all viewpoints. The pendulum undoubtedly has swung. Now the BBC has an institutional mindset of sceptical liberalism. There's ample evidence for this from within the BBC itself. Many have admitted to it. But most tellingly of all is John Humphrys, a relentless interrogator of politicians and staunch defender of impartiality whilst employed by the BBC. But when retired, his statements changed.
That the BBC has a kind of bias about it. It's not necessarily a left-wing bias, but it's a
liberal left-wing bias. I mean, it's liberal on the side of the left, I suppose. Yes.
Yeah. And you believe that?
Oh, I do. Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Left of centre, sceptical, even progressive. But how does this affect his treatment of Christianity? Roger Bolton, long-time Radio 4 correspondent, is of the opinion that you do have a whole liberal elite in this country, a liberal secular elite who dominate television. They have a bias against taking religion seriously. BBC television executives are secular and sceptical, and they see religious coverage as a rather tiresome obligation to be minimised rather than a rich and promising area to explore. There are some decent programmes on television and radio. Songs of Praise has come into its own during this pandemic crisis. But in BBC dramas, Christians are usually portrayed by stereotypes. Hypocrites, controlling bullies, or more usually, wimps. It's surprising that despite this, you do have occasional breakthroughs. The sitcom Rev, starring Tom Hollander, at times portrayed a sensitive treatment of inner city ministry. Deliberately Christian programmes are sometimes dire. Thought for the Day, the God Slot every morning on Radio 4. It does have a preponderance of Christian contributions, but with notable exceptions, these usually consist of bland homilies and insipid moralising from clerics who believe less than their parishioners. When the BBC does Christianity, it does a safe Christianity. A Christianity which isn't going to rock the secular progressive boat. Not so much salt and light as honey and soft focus. All too often Christianity is airbrushed out of the story. This became all too evident in the documentary I Am Bolt. In 1 hour 28 minutes of screen time, examining the life of Bolt from cradle to champion, it never once mentioned his Christianity. Yet, listen to Bolt's mother and Bolt himself.
So he's always saying, continue to pray for me.
I was brought up in the church and I believe in God and everything. When I go for big speeches and whatever, then I say, yo, thank God for whatever it is.
The importance and significance of Christianity in British history. It too is all too often airbrushed out of the story. Listen to Roger Bolton again. He asks, how can young people and immigrants to this country understand the UK without learning of the crucial role Christianity has played in the formation of its political structures and culture? To the BBC, not all religions are equal. In 2006, Michael Gray, then chairman of the BBC, called an impartiality summit. This was for the network's executives and key anchors. In a leaked report, it emerged that they admitted to a marked bias against Christianity and a strong inclination to a pro-Muslim reporting stance. Tossing the Bible into the dustbin on a comedy show would be acceptable, they said, but not the Quran. Over this Easter, there was a two-part programme called Heavenly Gardens, looking at the spiritual significance of gardens. The first part, on Good Friday, was interesting in that we discovered the importance of Islam on the creation of British gardens, including a garden which was created during the reign of Elizabeth I of England. The second part, on Easter Day, included a side trip to Glastonbury. There was no garden there, but a rather grotty grotto with deep spiritual significance for pagans. During Holy Week 2013, BBC screened Are You Having a Laugh? Comedy and Christianity, and promoted it with a press release asking, Is Christianity a joke? Looking at comedy and Christianity is a legitimate exercise. But we have to ask, would the BBC during Ramadan have screened a programme on comedy and Islam and included the press release, Is Islam a joke? We can doubt it. Andrew Marr, in an interview with Rupert Everett, said that many people thought Oscar Wilde was a type of grey Christ, and he mocked those who might be offended by this. Rupert Everett went even further. He said that Wilde was better than Christ. Would any of them have said this about Muhammad? Mark Thompson, when Director General, admitted that Christianity gets treated with less sensitivity than other religions. He said this is because it's pretty broad-shouldered. He continued, without question, I complain in the strongest possible terms is different from I complain in the strongest possible terms and I'm loading my AK-47 as I write. This definitely raises the stakes. If the appointments an organisation makes reveals its priorities, what do we make of the BBC's priorities when the head of religious broadcasting appointments during this century have included an agnostic, 2 Muslims and an atheist? Is the BBC biased against Christianity? The BBC is institutionally incapable of understanding biblical Christians. If there's an interview by a BBC journalist with a conservative Christian on a hot button topic like same-sex marriage or abortion, the journalist comes to it from the standpoint of secular progressivism. He sees it as purely a matter of human rights, whilst the Christian sees it as a matter of scripture and theology. And the journalist just cannot comprehend what this means and is inclined to write the Christian off as some weird bigot. So what do we want from the BBC? Basically, we want 3 things. Fairness, a level playing field amongst religions. We want the BBC to drop the lazy, cheap stereotypes of Christians, which would never apply to another religion. And thirdly, we want the BBC to try to take biblical Christianity seriously. Surely that's not too much to ask.